Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Injerto Pacamara Wash Process Guatemala from Equator Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Equator based out of San Rafael, California. And this coffee right here was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of a viewer subscriber recommendation suggestion series where it did finish second place out of 4 coffees on that day. With that being said, this is the only coffee roaster we had any familiarity with going into that video, as not only had we reviewed one of Equator's coffees earlier this year, but their coffee roaster we have pretty extensive history with, having participated in several of their cuppings before, as well as having been to several of their cafes in the Bay Area on multiple occasions. So they're a coffee roaster we've been drinking for quite a few years, and in the name of transparency, they've never necessarily been one of our favorite coffee roasters. But this coffee came highly suggested to us by Jack, and Jack is a self-admitted superfan of Equator coffee. And he's also kind of like a little brother to us, and he spoke so highly about this coffee that we had to kind of include it in our blind taste test rankings video, as we wanted to see if it did live up to the hype that he had bestowed upon this coffee. This right here is day 19 of this coffee. This one was brewed through the automatic coffee maker, just for reference. Recipe we had settled on for this coffee though was a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio at 200 degrees Fahrenheit brewed through the Chemex. This coffee right here was definitely pushing the development scale, so we're actually going to call it a medium American for the roast profile. And let's start discussing the coffee. So day 8, which was the blind taste test rankings day, and if you watch the video then you'll see that we noted 2 things specifically. There was a pretty prominent rose that was coming from this cup of coffee. I'll have a lot of familiarity and I'm pretty good at usually picking out those rose flavor notes. But the secondary characteristic was this kind of smokiness that was coming from this cup of coffee, and that made it a little easy to detect that this was Equator's coffee, as we'd kind of gone into it expecting it to be the most developed cup of coffee on that table, and made it pretty easy to pick out. It was still a positive impression nonetheless, as it did finish second in that video. Day 10 went back, and we had a slightly less positive impression the second time around, and we did keep it at a higher temperature. I think Equator usually suggests 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but we went to 205 degrees Fahrenheit given the positive experience we had had with the coffee. And when we tried it at that higher temperature, it came off very roasty, and that's why we don't have too many notes on this day, was because we didn't think that this was necessarily a good day and we were just going to try again on a different day. Day 12 went back, lowered the temperature to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were getting much better results at this time. Starts off like a caramelized sugar sweetness, maybe even a sweet tea sweetness, before it settled into a diverse array of fruits and florals, slight bit of stone fruit, slight bit of citrus fruit, and then there was a more subdued sweet tea as well, as we'd mentioned earlier, and the coffee was experiencing still a fair bit of this smokiness. Day 14 kept it at those lower temperatures, and the state of the coffee cannot be ignored, as it is definitely pretty smoky. It does provide this caramelized sugar that does dictate the sweetness in this cup of coffee. At this point, there's a nice fruit sweetness, again, that's somewhat subdued, but still definitely present stone fruit flavor, most reminiscent of that mango, and a pretty pronounced rose in the cup. So there's a lot in this cup, but it's all kind of encompassed in this slightly more developed medium profile. Day 16, coffee is progressively continuing to feel more and more medium. So we're getting a lot more of these kind of medium characteristics, a little bit more smokiness, a little bit more just darkness in general from this cup of coffee. Quite roasty, and most prominent descriptor we had on this day, and again in the name of transparency, kind of felt a little and tasted a little like burnt popcorn. Day 17, we kind of emphasized on this day that it's a little surprising given what this cup of coffee is, that it did still have a lighter body. So we were definitely getting a lot of tea characteristics in this cup, but again, the roasty characteristics of this cup were kind of lingering and dominant in the cup. Slight bit of rose floral in the background of the coffee, and a lot of the fruity characteristics had since dissipated. But I guess that's not necessarily surprising. Most American coffee roasters say drink the coffee before 2 weeks, because after that, then it does kind of start to die down a little bit. And that was what we were experiencing in this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and well, nothing necessarily reached above a level 3, so I think the thing we probably should talk about the most is the florals, because that's what we were experiencing the most on the earlier day. And the first time we tried this, it's probably at level 4, as the rose was pretty pronounced, but from that point on, we never were able to replicate the experience we had pertaining to that rose. So level 3 looks pretty good, but the other things that kind of reached those higher marks is the bitterness, the smokiness, and again, that does have a lot to do with the fact that this just felt like a little bit more developed of a cup of coffee. Cleanliness still reached a level 3, sweetness still reached a level 3, and level 3 for the finish. So we have a lot of level 3s. Nothing reached a level 1. The body level 2, we've kind of discussed that a little bit earlier, as this had a little bit more tea-like of a body than we had expected for this coffee. But the fruits, for the most part, never necessarily got above a level 2, and I think I'm actually pretty happy with the way that this tasting wheel looks, as this kind of does feel like a pretty accurate representation of what we were getting from this coffee. Alright, thoughts and impressions of this coffee. So it did finish second place in the blind taste test, and it did end up being probably our least favorite coffee out of the 4 coffees that we had. And I don't necessarily want to be that person that says medium bad, like good sort of thing, because I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. We'd reviewed a Ruby earlier this year, which was a medium, and I actually quite liked that cup of coffee. And if you're going to tell me that this is a medium cup of coffee, I will say that this is an exceptional medium. I feel like Equator did an exceptional job of this medium. Not only are you experiencing a lot of those kind of more medium, slightly developed characteristics that a lot of people do enjoy in coffee, but then you also get some terrific extras. You get a slight bit of fruit, you get a slight bit of floral, and you get some great sweetness. So if that's what you're going for, this is terrific. That being said, it wasn't necessarily my cup of coffee, and I guess that's not necessarily surprising, as my tastes have skewed a little bit more towards light in recent years, but I never want to discourage people from the medium coffees, as I've privately messaged so many people and said to them that there's absolutely nothing wrong with medium. I actually appreciate medium. I think that every so often I need a cup of medium coffee, as it just does kind of remind me of maybe some earlier days in my coffee journey, and a lot of people just don't necessarily love the acidic characteristics of lighter coffees, and that's why this is a great fit for them. So there are some terrific positives about this coffee. It just wasn't necessarily my type of coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to is, again, somebody that does like a little bit more developed of a roast profile, but still enjoys the sweetness as well as the florals, because those are the two things that are going to come as the extras. In contrast to the more developed profile, you're still going to get that kind of darker parts to it, lighter bodied cup of coffee, at the same time some pretty fun and out there different flavor characteristics that, truth be told, when they were present, were pretty nice and quite enjoyable, even if this wasn't necessarily my favorite cup of coffee of the year. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. If you have by chance had an opportunity to try this cup of coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it, as well as Equator, as obviously they're a pretty big name in the coffee world at this point. They've been around for a very long time, and they've had a lot of success, so I will continue to wish them a lot of success. I think that they're a great company. They've just never necessarily been my personal preference. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Injerto Pacamara Wash Process Guatemala from Equator Coffee. Thank you for watching.